In the Perspectrum podcast, we discuss controversial topics. Outside of this context, Michael and I are both working professionals. While doing the show, we are not acting as agents or representatives of our respective institutions, and none of the views that we express reflect the outlooks of our employers. So don't come to my office and throw toilet paper at me.
And I don't have an office, but don't come to my cube.
Welcome to the Perspectrum. I'm Nathan Seelove.
And I'm Michael Bloom.
And today we have a...
This is deja vu. This is getting a little repetitive. Honestly.
It is, but it's... Stuff develops. News happens. This is what happens when you run a news podcast. You do a segment on one thing, and then like time happens and more stuff happens, and you have stuff to update about it.
True.
So we're going to be talking about the newly elected Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who probably has the second most generic name ever, second to John Smith. And then we're going to discuss some of the horrific new developments and horrific updates involving the conflict between Israel and Palestine, which not looking forward to that one.
Yeah, me neither. But hey, we can have fun with the first, I don't know.
That was kind of depressing too.
Yeah,
that was kind of depressing too.
It was more fun to like point and laugh at Kevin McCarthy getting fired, but now that they've put someone in there.
Yeah, now that they've replaced him with fucking Mephistopheles, like I don't, it's not as funny anymore.
Yep. All right, you got us, GOP. Now who's your real Speaker of the House? You tricked us. Good one.
yeah, but seriously.
He pulls off his face like the end of Scooby-Doo and up. It's I don't know, Bernie Sanders.
I mean, it doesn't have to be a rep, you know.
That's true. It can be anybody.
It could be Bernie Sanders theoretically. But it's not. It is very it is very far from Bernie Sanders. It is someone who I'm pretty sure is a time traveler, because the only thing that I think can explain his fucking backwards ass view of the world is if he was born in like the 1500s.
Yep. Yeah, his outlook on life and the world is really strange. So the House of Representatives was without a speaker for like 3 weeks or so. And to catch you up on our last episode on this topic, Kevin McCarthy got fired by his own party. And then they had a hard time picking a speaker. There was no clear successor. They had Steve Scalise, but he had some health issues, and Republicans used that as an excuse to kind of disqualify him. Jim Jordan was too much of a nut job and too loud about it for this group of people. And then, a couple other people like threw their names into the ring, but ultimately, like kind of out of nowhere, this guy named Mike Johnson was elected speaker, who most of us have never fucking heard of, which I think was the main thing in his favor as he was, getting to be elected speaker.
I mean, he is basically Jim Jordan without the baggage and more homophobia.
Yeah, it's a strange cocktail. It's actually exactly the right cocktail for this far right MAGA portion of the extreme party.
His own colleagues didn't know him.
Yes,
a reporter went up to Senator Susan Collins from Maine, which, to be fair, she's a senator, and the Senate is very different from the House of Representatives. But a reporter actually went up to her, and she basically straight up said, I don't know, I need to Google him.
Yeah, seriously. I've heard multiple House members, granted Democrats, but multiple House members been like, I have no idea who this guy is, which is, I think it supports your time traveler thesis, because it's like he went back in time and got, wrote down all this stuff about Mike Johnson and then just showed up in the future and was like, I guess I'm elected.
And it actually explains the name too, because if you were trying to fit in to modern day society, I mean, you couldn't be, Barnabas Blumpkin or whatever names they had back in the 1500s.
The inventor of the Blumpkin.
Sorry, that makes him sound cooler than he is. Anyway,
Yeah, way cooler, way cooler.
um, no, you would have to pick something like, okay, what is the most common fucking first name in the world?
Yeah.
Mike? Okay, we'll go with that. What's the most common fucking last name in the world? Johnson? Okay, let's go with that.
Yeah, I just love how representative. I heard one commentator make this joke, but I'm going to steal it. I just love how like representative of the Republican white guy party all of their potential people have been. They had a Kevin, a Steve, a Jim, a Pete,
Yeah.
and now a Mike.
I mean, if they threw a Chad in there, I'd have a bingo.
Yeah, exactly. Matt Gaetz is pretty much Chad.
Yeah, true.
Anyway, so on the 25th, they elected Mike Johnson. He is a House rep from the 4th Congressional District in Louisiana. He's been in the House since 2016, so surprising that no one knows who he is. And yeah, he's actually, for being pretty unknown, he's actually kind of somewhat of an important-ish guy. He's the vice chair of the House Republican Conference for the second time, or for 2 terms, and as a member of a couple like important committees, including the House Judiciary Committee and the House Armed Services Committee. And he chaired, in the House Judiciary Committee, chaired the subcommittee of Constitution and Limited Government, if that tells you anything about his political leanings.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it tells us that he's a fucking hypocrite because he's another person that preaches limited government while being extremely authoritarian.
It's really quite remarkable how, that doesn't seem to faze these people at all. So let's talk a little bit about, like who this guy is now that he's the Speaker of the House, second in line to the presidency after Kamala Harris.
One thing that makes no sense to me is that, so part of the reason why Jim Jordan was not palatable to a lot of the more moderate Republicans, the ones that were in more purple districts, was his role in trying to overturn democracy and, destroy America.
Yep.
But Johnson is just as guilty of that.
Seriously.
He actually,
if not more,
if not more so, if not more insidiously guilty of that. Because one of the strategies that he actually helped spearhead in terms of trying to get the 2020 election overturned was, you all might remember us talking about this specific argument, which was that trying to do a lawsuit against swing states that had changed their electoral procedures to account for the COVID pandemic in order to basically throw the results of the elections within those states out, like make them contested to the point where no one would get a majority. And if something like that were to happen, then what would happen is the House of Representatives would basically hold a vote where the delegations from each state would get 1 vote for president, and Republicans control more delegations than Democrats do, which means that it would have it would have gone to Trump.
Yep.
Which would have overturned the election.
Yeah.
Like it's less of a let's fight against voter fraud strategy, because that's never going to fucking work. And it's more of a, here is an insidious strategy based on a loophole within a loophole outside of a loophole in order to make sure that democracy no longer matters.
Yes, seriously. Yeah, the New York Times in an article last year called Johnson, quote, the most important architect of the Electoral College objections for the January 6th attempt to throw out the election. And I think, there are a couple themes about Johnson that we'll call out. One is his anonymity, which I think works to his advantage. To your point, Nathan, Jim Jordan played a significant role in Jan 6, and that's the reason why he wasn't palatable to most of the members of the House. But because no one knows who this guy is, and his was a little bit more complicated, and it's just harder to convince people that a person that they've never heard of is bad, he gets to fly under the radar. So that's one theme. A second theme is what the other thing you called out, Nathan, which is this guy is smart. and that's bad. So like, whereas Kevin McCarthy was sleazy and Jim Jordan is a true believer, loud fuckwad, like Johnson is policy oriented, true believer conservative who is a little bit boring and is like, of the people who are considered for the speakership, he actually has sponsored the most bills that have become law. So he's like, his success rate for sponsored bills is like 6.5%, which like just is an indicator that this dude, who is a former attorney, who's worked on constitutional law for a long time, like that's his background, risks being really effective at implementing the horrible policies that he advocates for.
Yeah. And a huge aspect of his ideology is he is disgustingly, horrifically anti-gay.
Yeah, seriously.
And he has a long history of being disgustingly and horrifically anti-gay.
Mm-hmm.
Before he was a House rep, he was a lawyer. And so he was a part of this conservative organization called the Alliance Defense Fund, which is a socially conservative legal advocacy group. And they actually eventually changed their name to the Alliance Defending Freedom. And they collaborated with this other organization called Exodus. Exodus was this organization that was founded in 1978, which was considered an international leader in the ex-gay movement. And one of its biggest pushes was the practice of conversion therapy, specifically conversion therapy on children. And in fact, the group actually shut down in 2013, and its original founder actually posted a public apology for it, for what his organization had caused, for, quote, the pain and hurt that was caused by the organization. And this was after all of the fucking evidence came out about how gay conversion therapy is complete pseudoscience, and the UN even classifies it as a version of torture. This motherfucker represented a group that represented defending these people's rights to torture children in court. Now, you might argue like, oh, well, but he was just a lawyer defending them, and everybody deserves to have a lawyer defending them. That doesn't necessarily mean he believes in that ideology. Except, going back and reading some of the weird shit that he said about the gay community, it's just silly. Like, I shit you not, he blames homosexuality for the fall of the Roman Empire. In 2008, he told a radio host, quote, "Some credit to the fall of Rome to not only the depredation of society and the loss of morals, but also the rampant homosexual behavior that was condoned by the society." So I just like to point out a few things. First off, the Roman Empire lasted for 1,000 fucking years, which is a lot longer than the United States has lasted, and a lot longer than most civilizations throughout history has ever lasted. And during the entire time, gay relationships were actually fairly common. And in fact, towards the end of the Roman Empire was when they started to embrace Christianity and started being against things like homosexuality, like gay relationships. So it sounds to me like the loss of gay relationships was actually responsible for it.
Yeah.
Or
you know how
maybe
you maintain a really strong fighting force of virile men? Yeah. You gotta love your brother. It's there. It's right there.
Yeah, it was, interestingly enough, around the time that that Roman Emperor Constantine embraced Christianity and converted on his deathbed, was around the time that the Roman Empire fell. Interesting. Wow. It seems to me like that's what did it.
So we think he's time traveled from the time of Rome to collapse the United States with anti-LGBTQ.
Maybe I think
rhetoric.
that's it. I think that's
Could be it.
Or maybe it was the fact that the Roman emperor just kind of kept pissing off a bunch of Germanic tribes by trying to take their land, and the Germanic tribes were like, you know what, fuck you, we're gonna go fuck you all up. Maybe that was it.
If
Maybe
you
it was
guys
the fact
don't
that
know about Nathan's high horse about Germanic tribes and the power of the Celts and stuff like that, like, this is a hill he will die on.
You're goddamn right.
Okay,
and on top of that, there was also a slew of really terrible Roman emperors that were like corrupt and horrible and authoritarian, which, you know, another lesson that apparently Mike Johnson can't learn.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, his LGBTQ record is really horrible. Like in 2022, he authored legislation which has been dubbed the federal version of Florida's like "Don't Say Gay" bill, which prohibits the use of federal funds to develop, implement, facilitate, or fund any sexuality-oriented program, event, or literature for children under the age of 10. So that means that like you can't teach them about gender affirming care, LGBTQ people, or so it has all of the like weaknesses of the Don't Say Gay bill in that it like has the potential to chill our ability to just allow LGBTQ people to live and work and be themselves in society. Johnson also co-sponsored legislation with Marjorie Taylor Greene, Marjorie Taylor Jewish Space Lasers Green, called the Protect Children's Innocence Act, which would make it a crime to provide gender-affirming care to people under the age of 18. And if you're curious about that, we've talked about that on a few different episodes. You should be saving people's lives by providing gender-affirming care to those who need it. That's just pretty clearly the case. He's also written calling homosexuality inherently unnatural. He said, quote, "Your race, creed, and sex are what you are, while homosexuality and cross-dressing are things you do. This is a free country, but you don't have special protections for every person's bizarre choices," is his perspective. He also defended Louisiana's same-sex marriage ban before the Supreme Court in 2004 and 2014. So this dude has a pretty long history, like a 2 decades long history of public action against the LGBT community.
Look, this is who the Republican Party still is. Now, I do want to be very clear. That doesn't mean that all Republican voters are like this.
Sure.
And in fact, a lot of polls that I've seen recently have actually shown that a majority of Republican voters actually do support same-sex marriage. So I just want to be clear. When I say the Republican Party, I'm referring to elected Republicans. I'm not referring to like Republican voters. But this is who the Republican Party is. And I just want to make it clear that if you're still supporting elected Republicans, like, you are still supporting bigots. You are still supporting out and out bigots.
Yeah.
That are, that are fighting actively to try to take rights away from people, while at the same time taking tons of money from corporations in order to give them, give them an easier time.
Yeah, which Mike's record is also terrible on that front, on the corporate corruption.
I'm shocked.
I know. You must be really shocked.
No, it's interesting because he was asked in an interview like about his ideology, and one of the things he said was, well, the best thing that you can do to figure out what to learn about my ideology is to open up a Bible.
Yeah.
To which Colbert actually did a segment about that, and he made a point that I'm going to reiterate, which is basically that, okay, but the Bible talks about feeding the poor and, taking money from the rich to give it to the poor. Are you for that? Is he for that, Michael?
If what you mean by taking money from the rich is that you get paid by rich people and corporations, then yeah, I guess that's right.
No, God damn it. It's like he read the first paragraph and was like, take money from the rich. Perfect. Got it. I'm on it.
No problemo. Yeah. So he is a science skeptic, science skeptic for sure, but also a climate science skeptic. And he has accepted more campaign contributions in his congressional career from oil and gas industry than any other industries, and has repeatedly downplayed that climate change is an issue, which again is another one of those issues that's like, dude, we all agree this is a losing issue. Like, like polls continually show that people think that the climate crisis is a crisis, and yet he's just still holding on to these absolutely like absurd 90s Republican extremist talking points.
I mean, hell, anti-climate change is not even 90s Republican.
That's true.
Even back then, a lot of 90s Republicans were, I mean, hell, John McCain was ran on a platform of, trying to do something about climate change.
John McCain, our old progressive friend. Yeah. He also thinks that mass shootings are caused by teaching evolution, which is strange.
Oh,
yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
So
apparently,
so why don't they happen? Why don't they happen literally anywhere else that teaches evolution?
Oh, Nathan, that's a very good point.
I'm just saying, France is secular to, I would actually say secular to a fault in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean that as they're so secular that they do sometimes violate religious freedom, and I'm not cool with that. But they don't have mass shootings. So if the argument is, take God out of schools and that leads to mass shootings, then why haven't those happened in France or other countries that do have very secular governments and approaches to education?
Made an argument that takes evolution leading to mass shootings too seriously. but
this guy's the fucking speaker, which
know.
means that unfortunately the shit that he says we have to take seriously and actually analyze it and actually argue against it, because he has actual power. He is second in line to be the fucking president of the United States.
Yes. It's fucking crazy. So he's also a big advocate for not just, limitations of LGBTQ marriages, but also all marriages. So he's a big advocate for something called covenant marriage, which I thought was like a myth, kind of, but apparently it's becoming this talking point in the conservative right, which is basically where you eliminate no-fault divorce from a marriage. So there are certain states that have specific marriage types called covenant marriages, and they don't allow for no-fault divorce to end the marriage. You have to have fault involved. So it makes it, harder for people to escape domestic abuse situations, and also for people to live happy, good lives that they like. So fuck that guy.
What happened when no-fault divorces became uniform throughout the country? Spousal murder rates plummeted.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happened.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah, it's crazy.
On top of that, he has, in the actual halls of the House of Representatives, he has openly argued against the idea that the founding fathers in any way believed in a separation of church and state.
They wrote it down.
They wrote it down. He said, his argument, and it's this talking point that we've seen a lot, and I just want to go ahead and put this to rest for a second. He says that, when Thomas Jefferson talked about a wall of separation between church and state, that was a one-way wall. Because Michael, how one-way walls work. When you put up a wall, there's this magical generator that you put on it that if you go one way, you can just walk right through it. But if you try to go the other way, then just boom, because that's how walls work.
Yeah, totally. They imagined these phasing walls back, and we have this extensive historical record of the 1770s when they were imagining these walls where you could just walk through one way but not the other, revolving doors, which weren't invented until the 1800s or.
Yeah. But his argument is, Thomas Jefferson wasn't saying that you couldn't bring your religion into the government. It's just that the government couldn't impose on your religion, which, again, that argument falls apart on its face, because the moment your religion is in the government, by necessity, that religion, if it is being used to make laws, is violating the religious freedom of other people that do not follow your religion. And on top of that, let's see what Thomas Jefferson actually said. All right, let's look at some actual clarifications. In a letter from Thomas Jefferson to Jeremiah Moore in 1800, he said, quote, "The clergy, by getting themselves established by law, engrafted into the machine of government, have been a very formidable engine against the civil and religious rights of man."
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, bro. Yes, when Thomas Jefferson said separation of church and state, he meant separation of church and state.
Yeah,
he meant that your religion, your religious values do not get to impose on the laws of everybody. That's what he meant. He clarified that 1,000 times. It's not just one letter that he wrote. It took me 2 minutes to find this.
Also, it's right in the fucking text of the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. He's right about the prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Yeah, sure. But it's not like they said Congress shall not establish a religion. It's not like they said Congress shall not make an official religion. No, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Like, they're not even allowed to make laws that broach that are adjacent to the establishment of religion. This could not be a clearer, solid wall between religion and government.
Yeah, and this guy who is now second in line to be the president of the United States is too conservative for Thomas Jefferson.
Yep. Yeah, dude, this is bad. Yeah, he has a spotless voting history of voting against any kind of protection or legalization of abortion. He's earned a A+ rating from the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America organization. And he has fought to shut down abortion clinics in Louisiana when he was located there, and overall he's achieved some incredible results. Honestly, a 92% rating from the American Conservative Union and a 90% rating from the Heritage Action, which is a activist group for conservative values. So pretty amazing. He's got A- grades from these incredibly conservative organizations. He's a real fucking crusader.
Yeah. Basically, the best we can hope from this guy is that he will be ineffective.
Yeah, that's my worry. So that's the best we can hope, but that's not his track record. His track record is somewhat effective. And I think this is something I think this is interestingly illustrative. So he was he voted along with lawmakers to discourage the state's law enforcement and government agencies from working with the Council on American Islamic Relations, which is a Muslim civil rights organization. And he said that the effort wasn't aimed against, quote, people who believe in the Islamic faith, but simply was about opposing terrorism. All of us here are opposed to terrorism, he said. That's all this is about. It's like that smile to your face and then stab you in the back perspective that is along with his record of kind of being effective, that makes me particularly worried about this guy. He seems like he's not Marjorie Taylor Greene. He's not Matt Gaetz. He's not Jim Jordan. He's not fucking these crazy above the radar loud people that will that are there to rail and yell and try to start a movement. He's there to fucking change the laws.
Yeah. He is their ideology, but with a polite smile.
And now it's time for a more lighthearted segment, Tips for Good. So Nathan, why do we do Tips for Good every week?
Well, Michael, I'm so glad you asked me. Because we do Tips for Good every week because, dude, I totally miss you. I really fucking miss you. I'm all alone. All the time. All the time. Dude, I totally miss you. The things we did together. Where have you gone? I totally miss the honesty and special times, and honestly, I totally miss the fucked up things you do.
Chills. Absolute chills. Oh, dudes missing dudes. That makes the world a better place.
It does make the world a better place.
And the Romans knew that.
The Romans knew that. Absolutely.
That's the key to strong armies is dudes missing dudes. I agree.
Oh, hell. Shit. making the world a better place. That's also why we do Tips for Good.
Oh my God, of course.
Yeah.
Oh, just like the Romans. Yeah.
Just like
Aqueducts.
All right, I'll grant the aqueducts.
We should just skip straight to making the world a better place. I think
we should
that's
do
what
that.
do.
We should do that. So Michael, what is our tip for good this week?
Well, our tip for good this week is to prepare for the end of daylight savings time. So on the transition from Saturday to Sunday, November 5th, daylight savings time will end, which means that your clocks will go backwards 1 hour, which means you will get an extra hour of sleep that night. But it can really fuck with your sleep schedule if you are not prepared for it, especially if you have like insomnia or other like sleep related issues. So do things like going to bed 10 or 15 minutes later each night, the few nights before daylight savings time. Try not to just just take the hour of extra sleep necessarily, because according to some studies I was reading on AARP.com, because these are the people that write about these kinds of things. I
don't know why, but that's so funny.
Well, yeah, they're out here looking out for what really matters, that extra 15 minutes of sleep. Yeah, but apparently just like sleeping the extra hour over the following days can actually lead to worse sleep and therefore less sleep overall in like the week of the transition. So yeah, try to like slowly adjust your bedtime. Try to get exercise so you can kind of your body can absorb like the extra energy from that extra time period, and make sure you're consistently going to bed and waking up at roughly the same time each day. Just practice good sleep hygiene, block out light, especially because the sun will be coming up earlier. And overall, don't worry too much about it, but prepare for the extra sleep. And
also,
you're welcome.
And also, a reminder that you're going to gain an hour, not lose an hour. And the reason why I want to emphasize that, and I'm going to call out my dad here. So Dad, if you're listening, I love you, but this was hilarious. My dad actually, to start preparing, he started getting up an hour earlier. And he just started doing it. My mother, my dad, my dad's the type of person that is extremely confident in everything he does. So my mother just kind of assumed that oh yeah, that's right. That's how it is. That's what happens. And what was funny was it took him a day of waking up at 3:00. Yes, he normally wakes up at 4.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I know. Which 3:00 is a half an hour after I go to bed on a normal day.
Wow.
Before he realized, oh wait, wrong way.
Oh no.
And my mother told me about it, and I was proud of myself because when she said yeah, so we started going to bed earlier, I was like, oh, and I was like, wait a minute. And she's like, oh, you picked up on that. Yeah, I didn't. Because he was so fucking confident in it.
That is so funny.
So anyway.
Don't make that mistake.
Yeah, don't make that mistake. Love you, Dad.
Sorry, Mr. Sealove. And that's Tips for Good. All right, so now we turn to focusing on the conflict in Israel and Gaza, which is going to be another week of a pretty heavy topic.
Yeah.
So a few things to call out, at this point. One thing I did want to mention right at the top is that Israel continues to be under somewhat of a threat from rocket attacks from Hamas and other militant organizations, including some surface to air and surface to surface missiles being launched from Lebanon, and Israel is in a very defensive posture and somewhat offensive posture as they respond to some of those continued ongoing threats. And I think it's tempting to, I think, like lose track of that as we think about all of the suffering that is happening in Gaza as a result of Israel's attacks on the region. But from Israel's perspective, this is a war against Hamas. And I think that's true. And Israel is responding to an overt act of war from a terrorist organization. And so, like, our ongoing coverage of this issue is, again, not about Israel's existence. It's not about Israel defending itself. It is not about, like, Israel eradicating a violent terrorist organization. Like, these are all things that, as a nation, our official position is supporting, and these are things that we should be supporting.
Yeah.
Our, like, coverage here is all about how this war is being waged.
Yeah.
And, like,
we also absolutely need to acknowledge, and we did this the last time we talked about this, but I think that we need to acknowledge this each time we discuss this, because I don't want any words that we use to be used to justify horrific actions against an entire community.
Seriously.
Like, I want to make it very clear that instances around the world of hate crimes towards the Jewish community they do increase during these times of conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not okay.
Yeah.
Every single Jewish person who is an innocent civilian in this conflict deserves safety and deserves security, whether they live in Israel or whether they live in the United States.
Yeah.
And to the extent that there is anybody in the United States or around the world that is using this as a chance to spread anti-Semitic sentiment or to commit hate crimes against the Jewish community, that must be strongly condemned.
Totally.
That has to be strongly condemned.
Yeah.
And I think that any commentary surrounding this conflict does need to include that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. I've been so fucking disgusted by the anti-Semitic rhetoric and attacks, as well as the Islamophobic rhetoric and attacks, and like all of the fucking racist vitriol that has been flying around as the well-intentioned people discuss how to resolve an incredibly sensitive and challenging political and security issue in the Middle East. Like, a bunch of fucking racists are taking the opportunity to hurl insults and attacks at innocent people. It is fucking despicable and the worst kind of cynical, and it is fucking horrible.
Yeah.
Fuck all those people.
Yeah. So I want to make it clear that our critiques in this segment are not against the Jewish people.
No.
Or
no
even
way.
against the civilians of Israel. They are against the Israeli government. All right? They are against the Israeli government that is carrying out a bombing campaign against innocent civilians, which I know I pointed this out last time. I just want to reiterate this. By their own admission, the Israeli defense spokesperson, Daniel Hagri, specifically said that the emphasis, quote, the emphasis is on damage and not accuracy. Again, the emphasis is on damage and not accuracy. They're openly saying that they don't give a fuck about how many civilians they kill. They don't give a fuck about the people that they displace, about the lives they destroyed, the civilians that they are killing. They've openly said that. All right? The Israeli government has openly said that. And the thing is, there is a word for when you purposely target civilians as an act of warfare. That word is terrorism. When Hamas carried out their attacks, their initial attacks that killed 1,400 people, that was an act of terrorism, and it was disgusting, it was despicable, and fuck anybody that justifies it. But this response, so far, the most recent numbers are that at least 8,800 Palestinians have been killed in these attacks. We are almost up to 10,000 deaths. And that is according to the Gaza Health Ministry. Now, let's talk about that number for a sec. Let's talk about the Gaza Health Ministry for a second.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because there are a lot of people that will hear that the numbers from the Gaza Health Ministry and be like, well, hold on. Hamas is the governing body within Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
And the Gaza Health Ministry is a part of the government.
Yeah.
So doesn't that mean that these numbers are coming from Hamas? And doesn't that mean that we can't trust them?
Yeah. And in the past, Israeli officials, while they haven't said anything about these reported numbers, in the past they have said that the Hamas-run ministry reports civilian deaths as, quote, propaganda. So it's worth asking that question about the credibility of the casualty reports that we're seeing.
Yeah. So the best way, I would say, is to look at how they've reported on past conflicts. Mm-hmm. All right. And when we look at past conflicts, past major escalations, we actually do find pretty consistently that their numbers do end up matching up with the official numbers reported after the fact. So in the 2008 war, the ministry reported 1,440 Palestinians killed, and the UN, at the end of it, reported 1,385. So very close. In the 2014 war, that would have been Operation Protective Edge. The ministry reported 2,310. The UN reported 2,251. And then in the 2001 war that I remember we talked about, mm-hmm. the ministry reported 260. The UN reported 256.
Yeah.
So the ministry actually does have a good track record of getting the number accurate. Mm-hmm. Now, that being said, it should also be pointed out the fact that this is a much more complicated situation because there is so much more bombing. This is the most aggressive bombing campaign that Israel has ever carried out. Mm-hmm. And there are some officials within the Gaza Health Ministry that have actually said, yeah, we're having trouble sometimes with figuring out these numbers. There's so many disembodied limbs as a result of these bombs that sometimes it's hard to figure out which limbs go with which body.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is a bit of a struggle because of that. But whether or not that is a perfectly to the person accurate number, mm-hmm. it is a reasonably close estimation based on their previous track record, and it does not undermine the fact that there is a humanitarian crisis that is happening in Palestine, that is happening in Gaza, as a direct result of an indiscriminate, by their own admission, an indiscriminate bombing campaign against civilians.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Of those, like 8,800, we're talking about over 3,500 who are children.
Yeah.
Which like according to the humanitarian group Save the Children, this exceeds the total number of children killed across the world's conflict zones each year since 2019. So in just like 3 weeks, more children have been killed in Gaza than like annually since 2019.
Yeah.
According to the United Nations Children's Fund, right? So this is the UN. 420 children are being killed or injured in Gaza every single day. And as we said last week, or last time we covered this topic, kids can't be terrorists.
Yeah. And 50% of the people in Gaza are children under the age of 15. Mm-hmm. You can't just launch bombs in a heavily crowded area like Gaza and expect that children aren't going to die. Yeah. And this kind of goes back to something that we said last week when we were talking about Alan Dershowitz's comment, which is, the question of, is there a moral, what is the moral equivalency between directly targeting children for the sake of killing children and making a decision that you know is going to result in the death of children and making it anyway?
Yeah.
And the thing is, I don't really see much of a moral difference there, because you are knowingly making a decision that will result in the killing of children.
Yeah.
And they're even saying, I cannot emphasize this enough, they're even saying they're not prioritizing accuracy. All right? Because these officials, these government officials, do not view the people of Gaza as people. They don't view the children of Gaza as children. Yeah. They view them as terrorists.
Yeah. One Israeli Defense Force spokesman, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, was describing a recent military success by their measure, which was the bombing of a densely populated refugee camp called Jabalia in northern Gaza, which, like, they, it happened just yesterday, so they don't have the number of people that have been killed yet. But what witness reports describe catastrophic damage, just like people just lining up bodies covered in sheets on the road. One Al Jazeera employee lost 19 family members. And they were like this lieutenant colonel seemed to be describing this as like a success. He basically said that, according to the statement, that they were targeting, the airstrike was targeting Ibrahim Bayari, who they killed, and was described as one of Hamas's commanders, who was responsible for the attack on Israel on October 7th, the terrorist attack, it's great that he's killed. And the operation was also intended to take down the underground tunnels which had been formed underneath the refugee camp. And apparently they also took out dozens of Hamas combatants who were also potentially involved with the terror attack and were like killed and crushed beneath the tunnels. The thing is, though, that he specifically said that the IDF had considered all factors when making the decision to make the strike, quote, including the possibilities of non-combatants being affected.
Yeah.
We're talking about bombing a dense residential area where, yes, there are Hamas like fighters, there are Hamas military operations, but you're just acknowledging that there's also tons of people who they don't even know the number that they've killed yet, but it was worth it.
And there has actually been an update on the numbers at this point for that. And by the way, this wasn't just one. This camp was hit twice in 2 days. Mm-hmm. And so far, the official death count is 195. And 120 are still missing. Mm. So that number could be significantly higher. I'm sorry, you're not the good guy if you do that. Mm-hmm. I mean, if a terrorist, or hell, if a group of terrorists, if 10 terrorists in the United States, right, a group of 10 terrorists in the United States took over a shopping mall, they took over a shopping mall and had like 100 hostages, and the United States government just blew up the entire shopping mall.
Yeah.
Would you be okay with that?
Yeah.
Would you actually be okay with that? Would you seriously be okay with that? If the answer is yes, then what the actual fuck? If the answer is no, then you shouldn't be okay with that in this situation either.
Yeah, seriously. The bombings are also making an incredibly difficult and dangerous humanitarian situation as well, especially in hospitals, which are like receiving bombings like all around the hospitals. So according to the UN Palestine Refugee Agency, quote, all 13 hospitals that are located in northern Gaza are still operational in these areas, have received repeated Israeli evacuation orders in recent days. And they added that medical staff and patients include 117,000 people that are in these hospitals. And so they continue to like order these evacuations of these facilities, but there's like nowhere to go. And yet they're dropping bombs within like 200 feet sometimes of these hospitals, which are just packed floor to ceiling with people taking refuge and with patients. A UN humanitarian coordinator said, quote, "For people who can't evacuate because they have nowhere to go or are unable to move, advanced warnings make no difference." Which goes back to something we talked about a couple weeks ago, which is like Israel has been, and they provided in the refugee camp that they bombed as well, like notified people to evacuate and leave prior to these bombings, but there's nowhere to go. It's one of the most densely populated places on earth. People don't have food, water, fuel, or any place to stay or any shelter. Like they literally just have nowhere to go to even protect themselves. And so you see you see whole families and generations, like multiple generations of families just getting totally wiped out. These one Palestinian American family that I was reading about has lost 42 members of their family. It wiped out 3 generations.
Yeah. And so far, I saw that I read that 30 journalists have been killed.
Mm-hmm.
Like journalists that are trying to cover this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and what is the United States doing?
Yeah.
Like, so far, today was the first time I heard Bernie Sanders, who, by the way, Bernie Sanders should be the person who we already know is on the right side of this.
Yeah.
But like, he had been just disappointingly silent on this, and today he finally did a speech in the Senate
Mm-hmm.
where he talked about the need for humanitarian aid. He talked about the indiscriminate bombings. He condemned the Israeli government for that. And he also talked about something that we talked about previously, which I was impressed that he brought up, which is the fact that in many ways, the tensions that drove this conflict were the conditions within Palestine to begin with. The fact that Israel treats Palestinians like second-class citizens within the country, that Gaza is basically an open-air prison, that settlers are bulldozing homes and driving people from their land in the West Bank, that stuff like that actually led to these tensions. And he was, pointing out, like, even before what happened, things were not okay. It was a humanitarian crisis. And it was like, this is the first time I've heard someone talk about this, and it was the first time he actually, like, I actually heard someone call specifically for an end to the bombings, not just a pause, but an end to the bombings.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like almost 10,000 people had to die for Bernie Sanders to say that.
Yeah.
Like, Jesus Christ, how many, for the rest of the government, how many people is it going to take? Are they never going to? Like, what? I would ask every single senator, what is your number? All right? How many Palestinians are going to have to die in this for you to care? For you to say no more weapons to Israel until they promise to stop bombing, until they end this. All right? No more aid to Israel unless they end this carnage. Like, how many is it going to take? Because apparently 10,000, it's not 10,000. All right? Is it 20,000? Is it 30,000? Like, what level of a genocide needs to happen for you to give a shit? And then the Biden administration, God, they were asked. He was asked directly about the numbers from the ministry, and he basically said that, we don't know if those numbers are actually accurate. But what's fucked up about that is that his own administration is actually using the numbers from the Israeli health ministry in their own internal situation reports. The HuffPost actually reviewed 20 State Department situation reports and found that they were actually using the numbers internally from the from the Gaza Health Ministry.
Hmm.
So he knows that those numbers are probably accurate. He knows that.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, one of the first things that Mike Johnson is trying to do as speaker is he's actually trying to. So right now, Joe Biden is calling for a spending package in aid to Israel, to Ukraine, to Taiwan, and also for extra border security. And Mike Johnson proposed a package that is just Israel support, that is just money for Israel, and attached to it is reducing funding by about $40 billion to the IRS. He's fucking using this conflict to defund the IRS. That is the first thing that he's doing as the speaker. Trying to use this carnage in his stupid fucking mission to defund the IRS so that rich people are less, like, that rich people don't have to deal with their enforcement.
Yeah.
That is what he's doing.
Yeah.
And, Biden's already said he's going to veto it, but I mean, the fact that is what the conversation is that we're having, like, that is the level of conversation we're having. There's no suggestions of, hey, maybe we should withhold this until they stop bombing civilians, until they stop using our bombs that are paid for by our taxpayer money to go bomb children in Gaza. That's not even a part of that conversation, because that's not what Washington cares about. That's not what these people care about. It's fucking disgusting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, relief aid for the people of Gaza has finally started to flow in, but at a fraction of what is necessary to relieve their humanitarian crisis. And it includes food and water, but it doesn't include any fuel, which means that hospitals who have said that they're dangerously low on fuel, like at the absolute end of the road, will not be able to operate pretty soon. Like, the United Nations has said that there's clear evidence of war crimes committed by both Hamas and the Israeli military since October 7th. And that's pretty fucking obvious. And to Nathan's point, we're just picking a side and helping with the war crimes. And now we'll end our episode, because it is not really possible or in good taste to make jokes after a segment like that.
Yeah.
But we will be taking a moment of silence for all the fucking suffering right now in Israel and Gaza. So thank you to the amazing people that make this show possible. We really couldn't do it without all of you. And I think this is good work. I think this is important work. So thanks for helping us do it. So thanks to Jerry DeViller, Fade Out Scoop, Kyle Chaska, Taylor Bloom, and Tobias Janssen. Thank you to Kayla for editing our show and making it possible. And thank you for listening. And you'll hear from us again next week.